Welcome to another edition of Talk Stock Small Cap Interview. Today we meet Kris Weinberg, CEO of Telo Genomics Corp, whose cutting-edge testing and diagnostic platform identifies disease progression at the cellular level. Backed by 150-plus peer-reviewed publications and 25 clinical studies involving more than 3,000 patients, their proprietary technology is transforming cancer and Alzheimer's disease research. Their lead application, Telo delivers vital insights to medical professionals fighting multiple myeloma, a deadly blood cancer. Let's jump in and meet Kris and learn more about Telo and their efforts in advancing personalized medicine and improving patient outcomes.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Talk Stocks interview series. Today we're lucky enough to have Kris Weinberg, CEO of Telo Genomics. Hey Kris, how you doing?
I am great, Kier. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're very welcome. Thanks for giving us a bit of your time, and pretty interesting company here. We tend not to cover too many biotechs because the sort of life cycle is just too long, but this one really caught our attention in terms of who you're kind of working with. Maybe before we sort of dive into the company itself, maybe you could just give us a little bit of a background on who you are, what you've been up to.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. As a company, we're at a really important point right now, what we've referred to as an inflection point. So it is a good time to talk about the company and, dig into what Telo Genomics is up to. Personally, I've worked in the high complexity, high value cancer testing field, the molecular field, for over 20 years. I've had the opportunity and have capitalized on opportunities with some early stage companies transferring molecular and other technologies out of academia to the commercial world. My background and my success is largely in commercialization, but also goes down to the operational parts of the laboratory. And this was a great opportunity, I thought, to get in right as the science deep part was transitioning to commercial launch and be able to use the experience and the passion that I have for doing that with molecular technologies in cancer. As a side note, I'm a cancer survivor and am the beneficiary of some pretty advanced new testing. I was diagnosed with lymphoma in 1998. And as a result of some of the new technologies and therapeutics that were available, I'm here today. So this is a personal pursuit for me as much as it is a passion around the business.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you're here today. Glad that that certainly must be a passion project, and you've got some unique insight into that. I was going to ask about some of your past experience and how it contributes. I think you've probably answered it as best as anybody would be able to. So you're highly correlated to being able to run this. Maybe you could give a sort of a brief overview in terms of Telo Genomics and sort of what it does.
Sure. So we're a laboratory based in Toronto. Got 14 employees, made up of scientists, technologists, and laboratorians. And what we do just fundamentally as a business is we receive specimens from physicians. We run a novel molecular process on those specimens, and we give unique treatment guidance results to the physicians that send to us. That's the real fundamental operational side of being a laboratory developed test and a laboratory that does sort of high value molecular testing. If you sort of peel it back a little more, we're looking specifically at telomeres, which is a novel and unique target in this space, which, I guess we can talk more about and get a little deeper into. But fundamentally, that's who we are. We're a laboratory that runs samples that are high complexity for doctors who need that information. Oncologists.
Excellent. Sometimes, I've been involved in a couple of companies where you're looking for insurance to kind of cover some of this stuff. How do the economics, well, how would they eventually sort of play out? Do you have sort of better sort of payment process if you're a test versus some of the treatments that doctors would sort of initiate?
It's a balance like anything else. So you talked before about biotech and therapeutics companies. Their big risk is, can they get the regulatory approval for their drug to be approved? It then is basically automatically paid for here in the United States. That's kind of the way it works. If you can get through FDA and you are an approved therapy, you'll get paid for. As a testing company, we don't have the same regulatory hurdles that therapeutics companies do. So we don't have a proscribed FDA pathway from a regulatory standpoint. We don't have to be FDA approved as a test, but we have a harder fight to get paid by insurance companies on the back end because we don't have the imprimatur of the FDA. So, the way the economics are going to work around this test is through a shared distribution and shared billing arrangement with partner laboratories. It's kind of a unique aspect to the Telo commercial model that I'm implementing. And we can go deeper into it if you want from that side, but that's kind of the overview.
Okay. Well, can you explain a little bit about sort of like the genomics, like in the medical field today, and sort of your guys' angle on it?
Sure.
I've done a bit of reading, obviously, of your website and pitch deck and stuff like that. Did a little bit of cursory kind of review myself, but maybe you can sort of explain it for those of us that haven't been able to do that deep dive.
So the field has really taken off in the last 10, 15 years. And that's been driven largely by the democratization and the availability of next generation sequencing. And this is what the Illumina machines do. And, it's really changed the standard of care in cancer such that if you're a patient and you have an advanced cancer diagnosis, you almost certainly will get sequencing done on your tumor to determine what the molecular targets are and the optimal therapy would be for your cancer, right? So this is, referred to, like, the buzzwords around it are precision medicine or cancer personalized medicine. And that has become, in a really, relatively short period of time, it's become the reality and the standard in how patients with advanced cancers are treated and how treatment selection happens for them. We are a novel target, right? So next generation sequencing uses DNA expansion, in essence, to look at the sequence of A, C, T, and G and find where mutations are. And then those mutations are the targets of therapeutics. What we're looking at is specifically telomeres, which are the end caps on the chromosome. They kind of look like the little things on the end of shoelaces. And the status of the telomere as a biological marker, turns out, is really important for both the disease prognosis, but then also therapy selection in the treatment of the disease. And so the field itself has gone from pretty small to pretty broad fairly quickly, especially, in cancer. Our take on it and the use of telomeres as a unique marker is brand new. And so we're bringing a novel technology to a market that's already fairly well established. And we're positioning it with clinicians and partner laboratories, pharmaceutical companies, such that the telomere marker that we promote becomes on par with the other molecular techniques like sequencing.
Great. Could you explain what TeloView technology is and how it works in layman terms?
Yeah. So we receive a sample, and we begin by doing a fluorescence analysis of that sample. So we have 2 or 3 targets that we use commercially available probes for, and we light up those targets in the patient's sample. That's sort of step 1. Step 2, we run that through a proprietary image selection and image analysis software. And this is an advanced microscopy exercise that's done in Toronto by our technicians. Part of it is automated and AI enabled, and part of it is human interaction and operator dependent. That ends up with a really dense and a really feature rich picture of the telomeric status of that patient's cancer. We then take that really dense picture and we cut it into a number of different slices, like hundreds of slices, to develop a 3D picture of that fluoresced image. And then we analyze that picture using our database, our unique and proprietary database, to come up with a treatment assessment, right? So given that whole exercise, what we end up with is something that tells us, is this a really aggressive presentation of telomere dysfunction, or is this kind of an indolent, less aggressive presentation? So it's really a 3-step process. Each step is pretty high tech, and the end result is, indicative of how a patient's going to do with their disease and what therapy would be right for them.
Great. Thanks for giving us an overview. How does that differentiate from maybe other technologies in the market? How do you sort of push the envelope or push the treatment forward so this is better test for patients?
That's a great question. And in fact, that was the focus of what we presented with the Mayo Clinic at the ASCO meeting recently. So without getting too deep into like the specifics of the disease that our first indication is meant for, in patients with a precursor condition for multiple myeloma, there's kind of a transition going on, right? There are some signals of malignancy, but they don't have full-blown cancer yet. So they don't have multiple myeloma yet. And this state is called smoldering multiple myeloma. And smoldering multiple myeloma, like most cancer precursor conditions, is a spectrum. One patient might have a really indolent presentation and will live with it for years. Another patient might go from having it initially to it becoming malignant within months. And so what our test does is quantifies the aggressiveness and the instability of that disease and that precursor, such that we can, the data showed in the Mayo data that we can predict how close that patient is to flipping from precursor condition to full-on cancer. And in so doing, that information helps doctors treat, observe, be aggressive, be more, be less aggressive in how they follow the patient. It basically tailors the approach to patient management in a way that couldn't have been done without our test.
So I guess in theory, it catches it earlier, which I think is important for sort of any type of cancer, is sort of early detection. Is that part of the advantage? Is that through this, I guess, smoldering state before it actually turns into multiple melanoma?
Multiple myeloma, right?
Yeah, it gives you, I guess it would give potentially a doctor more sort of options for treatment to be either, as you said, less or more aggressive in that treatment protocol.
Absolutely. So, but it's an important distinction. So it's already going on, right? It's already there, and the patient's already diagnosed with it. We're helping to quantify the aggressiveness and the instability of that precursor condition. We wouldn't be used to identify it in the first place, right? So it's already there, but it's critical that that doctor knows how aggressive it is and how quickly it's going to progress. And that's what our test is designed for.
What's the sort of size of market? How many tests or how many patients do you think would, in I guess maybe the U.S. market might sort of you process in a year?
So, well, those are different questions, but the
Okay.
overall market at any given time, there's 250,000 patients in the U.S. I'm sorry, in North America, with smoldering disease, and as I said, they could be over at the one side of the spectrum where it is very indolent and it's very manageable, and there's nothing that really needs to be done for that patient other than see the doctor every 90 days. On the other end are very aggressive and transforming cases, temporally very quickly. So it's 250,000 patients. We think the average patient will get 2 or 3 of our tests, right? So it's done longitudinally. So 750,000 as a total available market is a very safe number of what our first indication can do. We conservatively think that we can penetrate that at 1% year one, and then percents beyond that, years 2, 3, 4, 5.
Excellent. Thanks for giving us an overview on that. So, are you currently sort of using the technology in a real world setting? Like, where is it in terms of its development, and when would you be able to turn it into a commercialized test?
So we're right there pretty much right now. The presentation of the ASCO data with Mayo represents our validation, our clinical validation. We're just post being awarded ISO approval. So that's one of the regulatory approvals that we need. And we're in process for CLIA approval, which is a US regulatory approval that we need. We're going to launch the test as kind of a soft launch to a small number of multiple myeloma physicians in August. We're going to grow that to a fairly small number of physician users over a 6-month trial period. That's strictly going to be physician use and comfortability and internal process development. So that's kind of like our soft launch. But we think we'll see 300 plus cases from physicians before the end of the year with that August launch. Then after that, we grow it through distribution and strategic means. And I think demand after that's going to really pop.
Well, excellent. Thanks for the overview on that, and good luck on the launch. So, again, pretty rare that we'd sort of identify kind of a biotech sort of related company that has this near term type commercialization opportunity. A lot of these things are 5, 10, 15 years of sort of development. So it sounds like this is a lot of work's gone into this already. Could you give us a bit of an overview in terms of how many patents the company has and how much sort of capital has already been invested into your platform?
Sure. So there's 16 patents issued and functioning in our technology process right now. So if you look at that process I talked about with the 3 sort of steps, each of those steps, really the second and third, are actually applying those patents in the workflow on a day-to-day basis. The company started with roughly $25 million in grants from the Canadian government. So our founder and head scientist, Dr. Sabine Mai, she's at University of Manitoba. And through years of work, she got grants and perfected the science of what we do. So that was, non-dilutive and really, for the purposes of development of this novel testing capability. The company's gone through, another 20 or so million in investor funds to get to this point right now, where we're sort of flipping from a exclusively science company to being a blended commercial and science company. We have, 57 million shares outstanding. We're, a Toronto Venture Exchange traded company. And we've got, I think a really good stable of current investors. We just did a private placement, oversubscribed to 2.8 million Canadian dollars. And those funds are going to be used for commercialization and supporting the launch and clinical offering of the test.
Hey, excellent. That sounds great, and we wish you lots of good luck with that. In terms of the platform, in terms of like telomeres and things like that, are there any other? Is there a pipeline of maybe other sort of disease protocols that you might be able to develop additional tests for?
Yeah, and I think, Kira, that is the key to kind of the whole thing. If you look at my background and the companies that I've worked for in the U.S. and the amazing technologies that I've been part of launching, the problem is that it's, sort of one test, one lab, and chasing after the business opportunity in a very expensive and sort of capital churning way. The real one of the real value propositions here is that we will distribute our test through technology partnerships and licensing deals with high complexity laboratories in North America over the next year. So we're going to have at least 2 or 3 laboratory partners that are running either all or part of the TeloView process at their site. And they're distributing the test, right? So they're selling it to their doctors, they're billing it to the patient's insurance, and they're paying us on a per sample or some kind of a creative licensing relationship or licensing basis. Those relationships are fundamental to how we distribute this thing, but they only work if there's, test number 2, test number 3, test number 5, test number 7. So we've got a pretty much completed program that will roll out after we get this multiple myeloma thing settled. We'll roll out a Hodgkin's lymphoma test. We will follow that up with probably another lymphoma assay in a follicular disease. And then we'll move to solid tumors. And we've got phenomenal academic data on prostate cancer, as well as data on breast and other solid tumors. So the future state that I see is, our process, our platform being in multiple laboratories really across the world, with multiple products running on that platform, benefiting multiple types of cancer patients in different treatment settings. That's the idea.
So theoretically, it could go from like one test, 750,000 sort of tests in North America to, depending on how things go with these other platforms, to doing, millions of tests. Obviously, solid tumor and some of these other conditions, unfortunately, many more people sort of suffer from these. That might benefit from your early detection and I guess detection on how aggressive the forms of cancer are.
Yeah, like the molecular characterization.
Would that be accurate to say?
Sure. I think, again, this is sort of deeper detail, but if you look again at our sort of 3-step process, the first step is a fluorescence experiment that is ubiquitous. There's hundreds of labs in the US. Well, there's dozens of labs in the US, hundreds in, the developed countries that can do that fluorescence experiment, right? So they do that, and that's the first part of our test. We don't have to do that ourselves. The second part, the really advanced deep microscopy and image analysis, this is something we could license or share. There's certainly dozens, if not hundreds of laboratories that do that. The back end, the database analysis and AI-based stuff, that's hours and hours only, but can be enabled virtually, anywhere, anytime. And so the onus is really on us to have those platform relationships, develop them, and then also validate our testing in multiple disease states in cancer, possibly other diseases. But that's really the limiting factor, is we've got to have as many programs going and products available to feed the platform as we can. And we're focused on that.
Great. Well, thanks for answering that. Who would you say is sort of like a main competitor? Do you have any, like, who would be competitors that we might be familiar with? Any other names out there?
Well, there is a company called Innovata. They sort of pursued a very similar strategy 4 or 5 years ago. Their, I think, B round of investment was done partially by another laboratory company called Neo Genomics. And so Innovata had a unique and patented novel sequencing technology for lung cancer. And they distribute it through platform relationships, which ultimately, sort of accelerated the commercial use of their testing. They got investment from, this partner laboratory, and then ultimately were taken out by that partner laboratory and were purchased. But, forget the business side of it. They really grew smart, and they had great technology that was very applicable to, challenges that doctors had with lung cancer patients and better characterizing the molecular side of those diseases. And that's really what we do, and what we want to do more of is like Innovata, establish ourselves in that molecular segment. They're not really a competitor right now because they're in different diseases, but they're a very similar type of company.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. You kind of touched on it a little earlier about maybe an upcoming milestone, but what should investors sort of keep an eye on? I guess you've got a launch of the test coming up late summer here. What other things should investors, again, what sorts of bits of news flow might you have here that investors should pay attention to?
There's 3, I think, material ones, right? So the launch and the commercial availability of our test of TeloView for smoldering multiple myeloma, that's a massive milestone. For especially for people who've been with the company for several years, it's going to be like, hey, we've got a commercial product. Doctors are using our test. So that's huge. We're going to have CLIA, which is a regulatory approval. That's going to happen shortly after launch. So that's a very measurable, very real milestone that we'll hit. And then before the end of the year, I'm very confident that we will sign a partner laboratory relationship. This is a strategic relationship for for the platform and for distribution. And I think the signing of one of those is the first sort of signal of validation of the business plan or the business model that we're going to pursue. So there's 3 pretty good milestones.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's good. And then how are you sort of enjoying your role? I guess it's a bit of a dual-pronged role, dealing with the operations of the business and on the cusp of something, that everybody's been working on for years and years and years, and, $45 or $50 million of investment. So congrats on that. I guess there's the other side, which is, being a publicly traded company. You got to put that hat on and sort of do things like this. What's sort of a typical day sort of look like for you?
So having a really good team makes it a lot easier. The president and chief technology officer, Sharif Lewis, he's a PhD. He's been with the company from the very beginning, and he's the guy who runs the lab in Toronto. I live in the United States. I live in Atlanta, so I get to Toronto a fair amount, but day to day, having a bunch of really good people there, really smart people there. And a good leader in the lab is critical. So, if I didn't have that, I would be in Toronto all the time. I'd never see my wife and kids. So that's good. I'm looking at some important hires on the commercial side. I've got 20 plus years of hiring and deploying teams to go out and sell, cancer molecular technology. So there's a lot of time spent, honestly, in flipping through the Rolodex and finding the right people that I can get for the right roles to, really accelerate this thing commercially. There's, obviously the Pubco side of it, which I'm learning and, doing enough of, I think. It was a process for sure to raise that private placement. I had never done that before. And so that was huge learning, but it also was almost like catharsis, right? Because I got to tell the story, and man, I went in just passionate and believing. And I think it shows, like in the results of the placement. So
Great.
I'm trying to keep in shape. It's like I've done some triathlons in my life and stuff, and I've played a little golf, but I'm working my butt off. So it's spending too much time on airplanes.
Yeah, there can be a lot of that. Spending a lot of time on airplanes and having to meet with a lot of people and do a lot of eating, breaking bread together when you're sort of pitching and stuff like that. So it doesn't necessarily work well for the waistline, but you've got to do what you've got to do. It's a balance for sure. Well, anyway, that's great. Are there any other things you'd sort of like to kind of talk about, or you think would be important for any investor sort of considering, to make a potential investment and acquire some shares? Anything else that they should know?
I would just go back to kind of how you started it. And that is that it's not that often where you've got a company with real, true established technology. The Mayo relationship speaks to the realness and the established, nature of what we have. So you've got like a real company with a real test here, a real platform that's going to commercialize. And we're 31 cents on the Toronto Exchange. It's an undervalued asset, I think, without question. And it's real, and it's now. It's happening right now. So, again, haven't been a Pubco CEO before, but those are my honest thoughts. Like, hey, this is a really undervalued asset sitting out there, and it's
Right.
going to take off.
You've been involved from sort of like an operational from your background sort of on the medical side in a number of like NASDAQ listed companies.
Yes.
I would say that NASDAQ listed sort of companies tend to trade at many multiples sort of higher than their counterparts north of the border here in Canada. Any desire to continue to advance this and look at potentially uplisting to either a different, more senior exchange, either in Canada or
Sure.
the US?
Yeah. In particular, the time that I spent with Natera, 4+ years, and built a product which is really changing medical practice in the world. So the time at Natera and how our stock appreciated during that time, my involvement in a lot of that stuff, and then also the time at Guardant, which was a little shorter, but again, standard of care changing, and like a really critically important innovation to patients with cancer. I don't see much difference between what we're doing with telomeres and what I was part of innovating at those two companies. And, with success, I don't see why we can't and why we shouldn't uplist and have, access to the resources like Natera and Guardant in my past lives in this field. I think it's absolutely doable.
Hey, excellent. I think that's probably a pretty good note to end on. Really appreciate the kind of introduction of the company, and I wish you lots of success with it. Would love to have you back here once you've got your sort of initial sort of launch out of the way. Maybe you could give us a bit of an update on how things are going, and maybe we'll see a fairly significant re-rate of your stock. So wish you all the success.
Thanks, Kier. I appreciate it.